making it easier, more accessible, and working as quickly as possible to start cleaning those instruments. When you can start the second that an tray is put away in a dirty cart, and you don't have to worry about the patient actually physically leaving the room, you can save some time or actually start getting that process started earlier on.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal to help you fight dirty. Every instrument, every time. Whether you are tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
This vendor spotlight on Beyond Clean is featuring Jarrod Watson-Lewis, brand manager, and Brian Sidow, staff scientist with Stryker. We're going to be talking about Stryker detergents. There's several of them we're going to be running down for you today, especially the importance of pretreatment. Everybody knows it, but how do you know if it was done? We're going to be talking to Jarrod and Brian about their Blue 62 pretreatment foam, and then also Blue 62 instrument detergent for decon, as well as E62. You guessed it, the E stands for enzymatic. That detergent also in decon. And finally, Auto 62. There's 3 different versions that can go into your automatic washer disinfector. We're going to talk about the application of all of these on today's interview and conversation around Stryker detergent. Stay with us. We're going to be right back with Jarrod and Brian.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
I am speaking with Jarrod Watson-Lewis, brand manager for OR Disposables in the SPD portfolio, along with Brian Sidow, staff scientist with Stryker. We're going to be talking about Speed Spray and Stryker detergents today, and it's going to be all about efficiency and ease of use. So, gentlemen, welcome to the Beyond Clean podcast. Really excited to have you both on. Jarrod, you and I have had a chance to meet in person on several occasions, including the HSPA conference the last couple of years. But Brian is new to me, so I am going to go ahead and introduce Brian first. Brian, can you talk a little bit about your background and maybe your role at Stryker?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've been with Stryker now almost 11 years. I came from the University of Cincinnati, so graduated from there, came up here, joined one of our project teams supporting cleaning, sterilization of medical devices, and have been doing that the entire time now.
Excellent. Well, I can tell you that there are a lot of our Beyond Clean listeners that are going to love hearing from a scientist on this episode. We're always talking about, what is the science behind what's happening every day on the front lines. And so, pulling back that curtain a little bit and having you on the episode, I think is going to be really intriguing for many of our listeners. And then Jarrod, I've had the pleasure of working with you and kind of knowing you in this space for quite a while. I want to welcome you to the podcast, but I'd also like you to introduce yourself to the audience in case they haven't had the pleasure of meeting you like I have.
Yeah, definitely. Appreciate it, Justin. Originally, I'm from San Diego, Oceanside, California, to be more specific. Played some college football in upstate New York at Cornell University at the Big Red. Started at Stryker about 8 years ago. I was in the Bay Area of San Francisco and San Jose, where I was in a marketing role, sold for our endoscopy division with cameras and scopes down in Southern California, and then I've been in this orthopedic instruments role for about a year and a half, covering our OR disposables and our detergents.
Well, you've certainly lived in some beautiful areas of the country, Jarrod. I got to give it to you there. I don't know how that transition from San Diego to New York went, but
Yeah,
not
that was
surprised
tough
you
one,
wound up
but
back out on the West Coast. Even though I love New York, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying 75 straight through the year is pretty nice.
pretty nice for sure.
All right. Well, like I mentioned, we're going to be talking about speed spray and Stryker detergents, but I think at the beginning of every conversation is sort of like the why and, what are we trying to improve for sterile processing departments and operating rooms around the country as we kind of talk through products that are helping, create efficiencies and more efficacy in the way that we do our jobs every single day. I'm going to go through a few of these, but I know like one of the challenges that I faced so much when I was educating specifically in, individual departments across the country. And this is going back quite a ways. I used to do a lot of regional, national, and account level education presentations. So I'm going back probably 8 to 10 years now. But when I first got into it, I think one of the assets for me being a registered nurse and advocating for sterile processing is I'd get up into the OR and really talk about pretreatment. If we want to be able to make sure that instruments are ready and free of bioburden, it all kind of starts at the point of use. But I know when I was educating 10 years ago, that could be a real challenge to be consistent with because of the pressures of turning over the operating room. And so have you both seen the same thing in the market in terms of pretreatment and being able to obtain, sort of consistency in that area?
Yeah, I'll start here. I think that's definitely been the challenge, especially when you have, as you mentioned, different departments that this part of the cleaning process kind of falls into. Because once you complete a procedure, pretreatment should start beginning with sometimes with the OR staff, depending on the facility, and then move down to sterile processing and continue to clean. And sometimes in that process at different facilities, they're not seeing it as their job to do that, or maybe it's not implemented. So then there's a lag time between when the tool or instrument was finally used and it has buildup on it from when it actually starts to get cleaned and makes that tough. So it definitely is something that is an ongoing concern and issue that we've seen.
I feel like verifying that the process is being followed is somewhat difficult. And definitely if you're trying to document on that and even show trending towards improvement, like that's often, somewhat elusive as well. But even just sitting in decon and knowing, did this happen or didn't it happen, sometimes is a little difficult to figure out. I know another thing because, back in, again, kind of going back a decade, but I used to sell detergents. And I remember sometimes I'd go into an apartment and I'd see a sink that had kind of been filled and then had the detergent, but then the temperature, because everybody just keeps moving stuff through, the temperature kind of gets really cold. And, there's been enormous improvement in this area. We just see sink side thermometers and, all kinds of technology to help make sure that we are activating the enzymes in an enzymatic detergent that's being, used at the sink and decon. But, this is another big issue in the industry as well, right? Making sure that the enzymes are activated and effectively doing their job.
Yeah, totally. I mean, when you have a ton of people coming in and out of sterile processing, and that means there's going to be differing processes, temperature set, time, speed. The water isn't gonna stay the same the entire time. So there's a lot of variables when you look at the process from going upstairs and the cleaning and pretreatment there, temperatures and the instrument cleaning downstairs that could really make the process pretty tricky.
Brian, from the scientist perspective, how much thought do you put into sort of, the activation range in terms of temperature for enzymatics? Is that a big part of your focus in developing a product?
Yeah, I would definitely say there's a lot of attention paid in terms of how sensitive is the enzyme that you're picking for your cleaning agent, being E62 is the example that we have with Stryker. We wanted to make sure that it was fairly flexible. It had some range of capabilities within the temperatures that customers could maintain safely and hopefully not have issues along the way. So yeah, that's definitely a consideration that we would take in putting those things together.
Yeah, I know we'll talk a lot about it more, like you mentioned, with E62 as we kind of move forward with the conversation. Another thing is that dilution ratio. And, obviously space is an issue. We hear about so many sterile processing departments getting renovated these days to help address that. But you talk to any SPD manager who's gotten kind of the original concept for the renovation of their department or a new build. And then slowly over that process, the space seems to shrink versus the original plan and design. So concentration is another one. And when we talk about some of the technology out there, it used to be you'd sink side, you just have a pump and you just do, an ounce per pump and you just pump it in there. And sometimes people thought more is better. And so they would just keep pumping. They could actually be over concentrated in terms of the enzymatic. And then, obviously that's costly when you're, not diluting as much as you can with the product, but also using something with a certain amount of concentration can also save some space. So there's an opportunity there. Brian, I want to ask you this also from the science perspective. If you have a more concentrated detergent, as long as you're diluting it properly, is it neither here nor there in terms of the effectiveness of the dilution?
So the clean agent should have a validated dilution range that someone proves the minimum amount will be able to effectively clean the products that it sees. They will definitely want to make sure they use challenging products and show that all that burden that's built up is gone, it's safely removed, and it's not going to present an issue when they go to sterilize it later on. So yeah, dilution does definitely play a role. I'm not going to say it's going to be the ultimate answer to everything, but it will definitely be a valuable piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. So, I kind of mentioned that scenario of just pumping the enzymatic, into the sink and just having, more detergent than's necessary and seeing that. I want to come back to you, Jarrod, just on the financial situation in healthcare. I mean, obviously, if you use more product than you need to, there may be, residue that gets left on, Brian, to your point, like you want to make sure that everything rinses off. But there's also a cost consideration here and being able to control how much product you're using. Are you seeing more and more attention being paid on the cost of detergent just because of the financial pressures that healthcare is under today?
Definitely. I mean, I think anywhere especially within a hospital setting, margins are in single digits or low single digits in some facilities. So every dollar counts, every second counts. And so when you have the ability to provide cost savings, which a lot of med device companies are trying to do in varieties of ways, whether that's directly through the actual cost that they're paying or if it's through other ways like actual longer useful life of an equipment or something of that nature, just additional values and benefits that you can provide. Facilities are always looking for that.
All right. We are definitely going to take a deeper dive on that in a minute, what you just said about cleaning solutions and, what is the impact on the useful life of instruments? Because I think that's a big one. Capital equipment costs, that accessibility of capital for new instrumentation has absolutely gotten tighter. So when you do make those capital purchases, you're going to want to make sure that you're getting as much life from that purchase as absolutely possible these days. And so I think that's really important. I want to walk through some of these solutions. We talked about E62, Brian, you kind of set the table on that. I know we'll talk about Blue 62, but I want to start right where we just were, which was pre-treatment and, talk through Blue 62 pre-treatment. Obviously each one of these plays a different role in the process of reprocessing surgical instruments, right? So I think we're all pretty clear on pre-treatment. Ideally that's happening at the point of use or immediately after use before it gets down to decon. But can you walk through maybe the efficiencies that Blue 62 pre-treatment brings to the table and tell us a little bit more about the product? That really, Jarrod, you can start for that one, but Brian, feel free to add in any comments on the product as well, since you know it so intimately.
I'll actually let Brian start here.
So yeah, Blue 62 pretreatment film is definitely a really effective solution. It kind of stems from the original Blue 62 instrument detergent, giving a lot of the same benefits that it had as the predecessor to it. It does allow the soil to kind of remain moist some before it gets to the cleaning process. That way it makes it a little bit easier to remove. It also has a good blue color, so you can actually know it's there and actually present on the devices. And it does come out as a foam, so it foams up and helps maintain the moisture of the set.
Yeah, and I think also, too, we heard a lot early on when there was a big push on pretreatment. There was a concern around aerosolization of the enzyme, and especially if, the patient was still in the room, and you were starting to do that pretreatment as they were kind of closing up and turning the room over. Does the foam prevent aerosolization? Is there something about that makes that a less of a concern or a non-concern?
So the foam would definitely help. It is going to make it stay more in place when it's applied to the equipment. It doesn't splash like some others might when you have a very liquidy kind of solution, maybe like a Windex bottle. But yeah, it does do pretty good in terms of the application process.
And then when you look at some of the options on the market that do aerosolize their pretreatment on an instrument, it's not allowed in the OR while a patient is in there. And I think that is one thing, as we talked about earlier, just like making it easier, more accessible, and working as quickly as possible to start cleaning those instruments. When you can start the second that an instrument tray is put away in a dirty cart, and you don't have to worry about the patient actually physically leaving the room, you can save some time or actually start getting that process started earlier on.
Yeah, time is of the essence when you're talking about pre-treatment, because it only takes like 20 or 30 minutes for blood and bioburden to denature, right? And start to adhere to the instrument, and ultimately, biofilms can result from that. And so I like what you're saying there, is that you can really, especially in like a long case, and we know those orthopedic cases, they could go a long time. That can leave a lot of opportunity for blood and bioburden to dry on these instruments. So I think what you're saying, Jarrod, being able to apply that foam earlier or as early as possible is definitely huge. I also like what you said, Brian, about the blue color, because we were talking about that. How do we verify that the process has actually occurred? This is a great physical indicator for once the set gets to decon that that the pre-treatment process, has occurred. Let me ask you this question. Why is it not an enzyme? Why is Blue 62 pretreatment not an enzyme?
Yeah, I mean, and Brian, I'll let you hit more on the enzymatic side of things, but when you look at what's happening in the OR in a pretreatment standpoint, the pretreatment foam is not being diluted in water, so you're not actually able to activate those enzymes or get the formula to a temperature that's warm enough to activate them if it's inside of a bottle inside of the OR, which is typically around 50 to 60 degrees in there. So we don't make it an enzymatic because there wouldn't be any true value that you'd be getting out of the product.
So the enzymes wouldn't activate, is what you're saying, because the temperatures are so low in the operating room and it's not diluted.
Correct. And if you're downstairs and you're using our instrument detergent, our E62 enzymatic, you would be diluting it with warm water to temperature or to activate those enzymes.
How long does the pretreatment last? That's a big question that a lot of people get, right? If we know blood and bioburden, sort of dry, denature, and adhere to instruments, in a fairly short period of time, how much time are we really buying, with this product? Brian, I'll let you kind of answer it. How long is the pretreatment effective for?
Sure. There has been testing with the pretreatment foam that has looked at applications of approaching 72 hours, and mainly it does still assist with the cleaning process. It is able to be effectively rinsed off still after that longer period of time.
That's great. What I'm thinking about is like in a lot of hospitals, I'm thinking labor and delivery in this case, where, labor and delivery isn't necessarily part of kind of the flow or the natural flow of surgical services. They're usually in another area of the hospital. And so there's even more of a delay in getting the instruments. So knowing that you've got up to 72 hours. I'd hope that the instruments were coming in sooner than that, but knowing that you have a big window, I think can, really put some people at ease. All right. So let's move into decon. Now we're going to talk about Blue 62 instrument detergent. This is for manual cleaning. Tell me a little bit more about this.
So Blue 62 instrument detergent is actually the first clean agent that Stryker Instruments made. It stemmed from an objective of trying to prolong the life of Stryker power tools because we saw some issues with clean agents in the field causing issues with our devices. So basically, Blue 62 was a clean agent developed to be gentler on the power tools while also still remaining the effective cleaning efficacy that it needs to have in cleaning the devices.
And, we talk about things like extending the useful life of power tools. Jarrod, you mentioned that. I want to kind of hit on that right here because, Brian, you kind of said that's why this product was developed, right? So, Jarrod, can you kind of speak to that a little bit further?
Yeah, definitely. And when you look at orthopedic instruments, the business unit of Stryker that we're at, our bread and butter is power tools. When you look at the system all the way from our early systems 40 years ago, System 6, System 7, System 8, now System 9, which we have most recently, that is extremely important to the success of these orthopedic procedures. And as they're really complex instruments, along with robotic instrumentation and other things that we've seen that hit the market, the detergents that we saw weren't treating our power tool specifically at the level that we needed. And to be able to do that while also positioning it when you're talking to supply chain, when you're talking to upper management around cost savings, to say, hey, you guys are spending a lot of money on this capital equipment. You want to make sure you're taking care of it. You don't purchase something with capital and then allow a year or two to go by and the equipment's breaking down. You want to make sure you get the maximum amount of life in this. And a lot of times it gets missed that the cleaning process could either help or really hurt that.
All right, let's move on to E62. I'm assuming the E stands for enzymatic. Brian, as E62 was developed, what are some considerations that went into really making this product differentiate from other enzymatics that are out there on the market to meet the needs, of the hospitals that are reprocessing?
So yeah, one of the goals of E62 was to try and be, one, effective in the cleaning process. So the formula is very heavily based on what is Blue 62 and slightly adjusted to better accommodate an enzyme within it. And kind of like we touched on before, it sought to have a very robust enzyme, one that could withstand a significant range of temperatures, work in a number of ranges of temperatures, and still stay effective. That was something that was an objective within that, and we did various tests to show that in various temperatures with cold water and other situations, it would still remain effective.
Brian, one of the other things that I've always wondered, especially when it comes to dilution, it is fluid, right? How do you ensure that there's like even dilution from all these gallons of water? I think sometimes with like the automated dispensers, it's, you kind of feel like the way that it's flowing into the water simultaneously at a certain rate helps with that. But just in general, what are some factors to make sure that you have sort of an even distribution of that diluted enzyme and detergent, kind of consistently throughout, the gallons of water in the sink?
Yeah, I know some groups have different measurement systems to make sure that they apply a consistent amount of detergent on a regular basis. So they would use those various tools that are available to them to do those things.
So, Brian, one of the things that is, just sitting sink side and watching detergent dilute into, many gallons of water, I always kind of wondered, like, are we getting the same amount of enzymatic throughout all of this water? Did you guys think about that? Is that even a consideration from a scientist's perspective as you're developing a product like E62?
Yeah, it definitely was. So we wanted to make sure that there was a high enough concentration of enzymes within E62 and that within the dilution rate, you would get a sufficient amount of those enzymes to maintain the desired effectiveness of the clean agent and get the benefit of the enzyme as well.
I just think about that because of all the nooks and crannies on instruments, and especially, you start to get into more complex instrumentation like power tools. Obviously, you're going to want, an even amount of enzyme diluting into all of those different areas for effective cleaning. That's really interesting. I'm not sure that it really ever occurred to me to ask somebody. It's nice to have a scientist on this show to kind of, put that out there and get a real answer from. Let's talk about Auto 62. Obviously, this is a slightly different product than the prior three, and there's three different versions. So, Brian, why don't you talk about the three versions of Auto 62 and kind of the components of those? And then, Jarrod, you can talk about some cost savings opportunities in this area.
So yeah, within Auto 62, there are three different clean agents in that family. There's Auto 62 neutral, Auto 62 enzymatic, and Auto 62 lubricant. Each is for a slightly different phase of the washer. Obviously, the neutral one is a neutral clean agent. It's a non-enzymatic one. And then you have Auto 62 enzymatic, which is an enzymatic version of the clean agent. So you basically can use a wash phase. You can use an enzyme wash phase. You can use both, if you so wish, to be able to clean the devices. The Auto 62 lubricant is then a lubricant that can be applied during the lubrication phase of the AME washer if your device requires some degree of lubrication.
Excellent.
Yeah. And then you talk on the cost saving side of things. I think the biggest piece is the variety of products that are on the market all do a good job in cleaning the instrumentation. I think what we really pride ourselves on is the ability to do it at a lower dilution rate. So you're really doing the same job with less product. And that standpoint, it's kind of self-explanatory, but a customer can use 2.5 gallon jug and get twice as much time out of it.
Yeah. And even just having to go get things hooked up and having enough space for that too, and being able to move it around logistically, just weight wise, just the actual physical workload on doing that job. I feel like there's a benefit. All right. So as we're kind of wrapping up here a little bit, there is a white paper on Blue 62. There's also a cleaning validation and compatibility study for Auto 62. So if you are listening to this on your favorite podcast application, we'll have some links in the write-up so that you can look at those materials. If you've downloaded the smartphone app for iPhone or Android, definitely open up this episode, click on the gift box, and find some bonus content there relating to this. But Brian, I thought maybe you could just give everybody a high-level overview on the white paper and the cleaning validation before we wrap up here.
Yeah. So the white paper, it kind of stems from the origins of Blue 62 instrument detergent. That was a study that was done a while back to show that the instruments were not showing negative impact from Blue 62, that they were having better performance over the life of their devices. And that is definitely what that white paper did a really good job of showing. And then when it comes to the clean validations, definitely we've done numerous clean validations with our various cleaning agents to show that they all are effective at their minimum concentrations and on various complex instruments to show that they will be effective when used.
All right. So as I mentioned, we'll have links in the write-up, but also want to encourage everybody, just connect with your local Stryker rep for power, and they'll be able to talk to you all about Blue 62, E62, Auto 62, the pretreatment spray. They'll be able to get you all the information that you need as well. And visit the website, Stryker.com, like and follow Stryker on social media, Instagram and LinkedIn. Gentlemen, great conversation today. I kind of want to get some final thoughts from each of you before we wrap up. But Brian, I'll start with you. I'd love talking to a scientist, somebody who is really, intimately knows the products and the science behind them and why they work. It was really a pleasure having you on the show. Anything you want to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, definitely appreciate being on. I know clean can definitely be a difficult area with some of those complex devices and even getting the clean agents right. So we definitely want to make sure we help our customers do what they can to best take care of the equipment and be as successful as they can be.
And Jarrod, always a pleasure to talk to you, my friend, and looking forward to seeing you again next year at HSPA if I don't catch you sooner at any of the other trade shows and events. But appreciate you coming on, and anything you want to add.
Yeah, definitely a pleasure as always. And I would just say to echo Brian, like you said, it's a complex space, but to know that we have people supporting the data to support your facility and your people.
All right. As I mentioned, definitely connect with your local power rep from Stryker. Visit the website, Stryker.com. Like and follow them on social media, Instagram and LinkedIn, and look for the bonus content in the smartphone app for iPhone or Android, or just check the links in the description and the write-up. Brian, Jarrod, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
That was Jarrod Watson-Lewis, brand manager for OR Disposables and the SPD portfolio, along with Brian Sidow, staff scientist with Stryker, talking about Speed Spray and Stryker detergents, specifically Blue 62, E62, and Auto 62. A couple of things from this conversation that I really liked. One, sort of that process verification by having that blue color, so that when the instruments hit decon, you actually know that they have been pre-treated with Blue 62 pre-treatment. I also like that it's a foam. So, time is money in the operating room, and making sure that they can apply that pre-treatment as soon as possible. That is also a really nice advantage. And obviously everybody is looking for cost savings in today's environment. And I know Jarrod did an excellent job of outlining where there can be direct cost savings, but also cost savings that might not be as easy to quantify, which would be the life or the useful life of the instruments that you're purchasing. Also, always love talking to a scientist and hearing a little bit of the underlying methodologies in product development. Brian did an absolute amazing job with that. I do want to remind everybody there's a Blue 62 white paper, and they do have cleaning validation and compatibility studies for Auto 62. So be on the lookout for links in the description for this podcast, or use the smartphone app for iPhone and Android. Click on the gift box and find bonus content there. And also connect with your local power rep, or visit Stryker.com and follow them on social media, Instagram and LinkedIn, for more great information from Stryker. Really enjoyed this conversation today with Brian and Jarrod. Thank you all out there for listening to this vendor spotlight on Beyond Clean.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app, or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for Beyond Clean in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts, and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We look forward to hearing from you.